place where they were taken care of. So that's one success. The other success was going in after that and going into Broadcom as the first person who had ever done the role of corporate development and trying to build within a large corporation where I had never been in a large company. I'd been in a large law firm, which is sort of a group of individuals, and be within a company. And learning within that environment how to navigate it, what was important politically, who I needed to worry about, how was I going to get them to adopt all of these things that I thought were important from a process and structural standpoint in what was essentially the largest group of startups amalgamated in one company. And the success of ultimately being able to do that and doing it in an environment that, quite frankly, was one where I had to make sure that my back was never facing the door because there was likely to be a knife in it when I did it. So what are the things that when I think about when I look back, it was for me understanding how important it was in any environment to be politically savvy, to understand who I needed to at any one time make sure I had relationships with. As I said to somebody at lunch, I had always thought, and I think a lot of women think, that if you just put your head down and you work really hard and you do a really good job, you're going to get rewarded. And it's one of those things that I wish I had learned earlier on, that you'll get rewarded, but you won't get as far unless you do some other things, which we'll talk about later, to really have people understand who you are and what you can bring to them.
Yeah, probably my most fulfilling success came after one of my largest failures. I was running a company that I was brought into as the CEO back in the 2004 timeframe. And for many reasons, it really didn't work out. The market wasn't really right, and the role that I was playing in wasn't right. And I think in a lot of venture firms, these things don't work. You end up with a big failure, and you end up having to do a lot of introspection. So coming off of that, I ended up doing a leadership development program, ALF, which some of you may be familiar with, which was allowed me to do a lot of introspection and thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I started to get involved in politics. Hillary Clinton was thinking about running for president. She hadn't been announced, and I decided that I would spend my time trying to get her elected. So I made it my business to take some of the skills, my strongest skills, which have to do with fundraising and sales, and apply it to a completely new area that I knew nothing about. So I spent the time really networking through a whole bunch of people that I had never known before, building up relationships, and before Hillary even decided to run, and helping Nancy Pelosi win back the House. And when Hillary was ready to actually run, I was at a place where I had a very broad network of people, and this whole world opened up to me that took advantage of my strengths, but also allowed me to really expand not only my network, but also get to really understand and get to know the motivations, the thinking of lots of people, not only in Silicon Valley, but around the whole country. So I really was able to expand my whole view of the world, really expand my leadership skills in a completely new environment. And that was very fulfilling. And I think some of my lessons from that is to really focus on something that you're really passionate about. You can reinvent yourself at lots of different times in your life. Really focus on bringing the skill sets that you know are really your strengths and applying them. They can be applied in new ways. And doing something that's really bigger than yourself, where you're part of something larger, can be very fulfilling. And I think as I move along in my life, really being able to give back and to be part of a larger movement and help other people develop is very rewarding and fulfilling. Now I'm focusing back on maybe going back into industry, but what I've really realized that the experiences that I've had really now translate into the next thing that I'm doing, because I'm looking for things that bring that passion, that ability to look at a broader vision, to have a passion, and bring it into everything that I do. And that's been a real learning and growing experience, and very, very fulfilling.
Okay, well, I think Sadia wanted us to highlight two successes or high points in our career, and two areas that, where in retrospect, we might have done things differently. So for me, the first one was starting a company back in '83. People didn't start too many companies in those days, much less South Asian women. When I told people I was starting a company, people just looked at me like, I was completely nuts. There were very few venture capitalists. The whole lingo of startups wasn't around. So it was just doing something very different and out of the ordinary. And the whole transition from research lab scientist to businesswoman, entrepreneur and businesswoman, to me was a success because not so much that the company was successful. It was. And we had a fantastic exit and all of those things. But to me, the success was really in that I feel I was able to make that transition and grow and learn in an area, in which nobody in my family had ever been in the business world. I come from a family where everyone's a professional, lawyer, professor, and so on. So to successfully make that transition while having 2 children and and a husband and maintaining my relationships with my family and friends, to me, I think that was a success, learning to do that well. The second one, even though I did start a second company, to me that was more of the same. But the next success, I think, was to be able to transition from the for-profit entrepreneurial world to the world of starting a community center, India Community Center. At that time, no one had ever done a community center in North America that was secular. There are lots of community centers attached to temples, mosques, gurdwaras, churches, but nobody had done a secular community center. So that whole process of conceiving it with my co-founders and getting it off the ground, getting it funded, getting a beautiful building, and now seeing the thousands and thousands of people that walk through the doors and are served every day, to me that's very rewarding. What would I have done differently? I look back and I see lots of mistakes. It's littered with mistakes, but the first big one I would say was selling my second company too early to the wrong acquirer. Many people do that. I think we were dazzled by the money. It was just such a huge offer. So we kind of equated success with the size of the offer. And in hindsight, for all sorts of reasons I'd be happy to describe to anyone, it was not the right fit. And I still regret it to this day, even though everyone did well financially, but from a product and culture and everything, it just wasn't the right fit. The second thing that I wish I could have done differently is when we built this beautiful new building at ICC and we financed it with $16 million of a bond debt, we hadn't really worked through the business model of how we were going to become break-even and eventually pay off this debt. So that's still a work in progress, I have to humbly admit. But I'm confident, like all entrepreneurs, we will solve it and we'll get there. But that's a big learning experience. So it says that no matter how experienced you are at whatever you've done, you're still capable of making mistakes, and the key is to recognize it and move forward.
I think the key is, and I think it came out in the morning panel also, say yes, at least make the move.
Yeah.
You might not be right every time, but until unless you make the effort, you will never know. So I'll come back to you, Talat, on the entrepreneurship question. Hildy, in one of our conversations, you had brought up a really interesting concept that I have